All Things TechIE podcast is a product of the Extreme Media Network. For advertising and sponsorship opportunities, please visit www.extrememedia.ie. That's XTREME media.ie.
So it's the All Things Techie podcast. I love when we have Irish people on the program. Like we trying to keep it Irish. You know what? This side of the year we have actually kept most of our episodes Irish. I'm joined with Sean Higgins. He's from Future Proof Media and Future Proof Insights. Sean, before you explain what the company is all about, give me a bit of your background in technology.
Perfect. So firstly, look, Justin, just want to say thanks a million for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. So on myself, I suppose my kind of tech journey, I suppose, started out straight out of college. So I began working with Accenture based there in Dublin, straight out of college, and I worked in kind of systems integration. So done a lot of kind of large scale implementations in kind of big pharma, kind of consumer goods and services kind of industries. So got great exposure, worked with a lot of great people, a lot of clever people throughout that kind of space and time. I stayed there for a couple of years, and then got kind of the itch to go and do something myself. So made a bit of a pivot, you might call it, where I went from the tech industry into kind of the creative side of things, and I set up Future Proof Media with a good friend of mine, Connor Talty. And so went from kind of, I suppose, big tech to small agency, small approach, and fully creative. So it was a very, very kind of big change to the pace and to the approach, but it was a great learning curve. And then kind of out of that and the growth of the company, we launched Future Proof Insights. So it's kind of like a partner business under the same umbrella, where we do consumer insights research, but kind of through the lens of consumer neuroscience and biometrics, and kind of basically using neural inferences to inform kind of consumer information and consumer research.
So I have to ask then, what was the degree in university?
So I graduated from Trinity College with in the management science and information system studies. So back when I did it, it wasn't quite as popular as it is now. So it's a bit of a hot topic, but I think I kind of snuck in there before it and got in ahead of the curve maybe.
Now, I sort of understand it as a tech, but for people that don't understand what the whole end of neuroscience is, like I've been looking at Future Insights website, and you talk about your different services of being able to like eye tracking. Now, for the basic consumer like me, I'll go onto a website, I'll see something that I like, I'll go, yeah, but you know what? I'll come back to that. The kids need to be fed, or maybe I should ask the missus, or maybe I shouldn't even mention that I'm going to buy this product. You know, like I've seen a good website during COVID at the beginning of the lockdown, Sean, where you could buy things like a food menu and charge it back to your company. They had names for different things that you might want, such as like a couple of cans of beer could be actually put down as a keyboard on a receipt. But we're not telling people to do that. Just want to make that clear. But you go into online, you go into a shopping cart, you might park it and not return to it, but then all of a sudden you're getting emails, or you're getting reminders, or your cookies is throwing up the same image of that product that you have looked at, whether it be on Amazon or whether it be on another online store. Is this all related to what you guys do?
So I suppose in a sense it would be. So I know we've all seen kind of the recent changes in kind of tracking and data privacy and all the different kind of restrictions, whether it's the iOS update that came through earlier in the year. People are kind of valuing their privacy. But I suppose where this all came from originally was that, you know, when you're looking at those kind of optimized customer journeys, where, you know, you look at a pair of runners on the Nike website, and then everywhere you go across the internet ecosystem, that pair of runners is following you until you buy it. But where we kind of, and I suppose the motivation for setting up Future Proof Insights was that every element of the, I suppose, the consumer journey and customer journey has been optimized almost to the nth degree. So whether it is your ads, your media buying, your even to you've got bots on sites to interact with from a customer service perspective, all this sort of stuff is going on. It's all brilliant. But the one thing that really was a glaring kind of opportunity for us was that creative work and design work, whether it's UX or it's, the actual ads, is still very objective. So people are still using their opinion, or people are still being asked what do they actually think of something. And the interesting thing about it is when you ask people questions, there's a strong possibility that they're going to lie. So they mightn't even have the capability of articulating what they actually felt. So
and people don't like filling out surveys. People
exactly.
get, especially when they're multiple choice from 1 to 5, you're not going to get as much an accurate answer as the way you guys do it.
Absolutely, yeah. So essentially then, like, where we kind of came upon the idea and what kind of strengthened the case for setting up future proof insights was around optimizing creative experiences and I suppose consumer experiences from the perspective of things that happen to you automatically. And I suppose the way I always would explain it is that if you think of your brain as the most powerful prediction engine you could possibly encounter. So the amount of information that we absorb through whichever of our senses it is, whether it's sight, touch, smell, whatever it is, audio, all different aspects, we're able to process that and make predictions that are in our best interest. So I suppose supposed to be in our best interest would be the caveat, I'd say. So what you'd often find is when you start kind of looking at it through this lens, you start realizing that, well, sometimes I don't always behave in my best interest, whether it is, staying up late, whether it's, people smoke, they know it's not good for them, they still do it. So people behave in irrational ways that can't be explained by pure logic. And there's enough literature out there that kind of explains that around 90 to 95% of our brain activity is happening below our level of conscious processing. So essentially we're on autopilot, as frightening as that sounds.
That's actually very scary. 95% of the time we're on autopilot. That is actually, yeah.
So it's interesting, and in a sense that a lot of things that you might think are very considered actions sometimes aren't. They're actually quite irrational in the sense that, or even how you came to make what you made a considered purchase, whether it is, purchase of a car. You would think, if you're going to spend 50, 60, 70,000 on a very, very high end car, then what you might really think is, that you would have gone to 12 dealerships, checked it all out, studied extensively online. But what you'd actually find when you analyze most people is that it's quite an irrational decision linked to things like status and motivating factors and feelings that people actually have in response to the product or whatever it is, the advertisement. So in saying all that, what we want to do is understand that interaction that you're having automatically. And we want to be able to basically measure all the data that comes in parallel and filters into our platform, and then spit it out in a consumable and an understandable way. So you kind of hinted at some of the measures that we use, whether it is eye tracking, so we can measure attentiveness, your visual gaze paths, where you're looking and how you're looking at it. So how attentively you might, attend to a particular experience can, you can make multiple inferences from that, from just the eye tracking alone. So it's quite valuable.
Let's have a look at the eye tracking. Are you physically getting a load of people into a room and just doing product testing and just watching their eye movement across the product, or?
So that would be if we were to do an eye tracking only study. What we would do is we have two approaches. We have our lab-based test. Well, we call it lab-based. There's no white coats and there's no there's nobody walking around with clipboards or anything like that. It's essentially screen-based, where you'll be hooked up to our devices, and you'll come in and you'll execute a specific test journey whilst logged into our platform. That would be essentially your lab-based approach. But we also have our online approach, where we can circulate, your cloud-based link, and anyone with I suppose a semi-modern laptop or device can log in and execute the test through their webcam. And so the trade-off in those is that, flexibility and scalability trades off with precision. So our lab-based test and a lab-based approach would be a little more precise than say our remote approach, but you do have the flexibility of, casting the net wide, meeting people in their home environments, and all these sort of kind of trade-offs that you would have versus the lab-based environment.
So for the online version, and I guess you had to do a lot of that during the COVID lockdowns, would you be just telling your testers, okay, turn on your webcam? Are you able to trace it to a webcam?
Yeah, so essentially what they'll be on the receiving end of a cloud-based link, and they'll log in, and that will essentially log into their instance of our test study, and they will have their full test script. It'll be fully immersive, the test journey, whatever we're doing. If it is, UX, you have a fancy new design on your site or your ecom platform or whatever it may be, we'll send them out. We can shoot them out from the test experience to the actual instance, and then we can have them execute specific tasks and steps and so on, and they will be under observation. But I suppose now, like, it would be a good time now, I suppose, to say, like, the real value in what we do would be what we've talked about is a single eye tracking, I suppose, study. And while extremely valuable and a huge wealth of insight comes from that, what we do is actually called the multimodal approach. So what we do is we would analyze your eye tracking in parallel with your facial expression analysis, in conjunction with your galvanic skin response, and maybe your EEG, so that'd be your electroencephalography. So all these big words. So I'll break them down a little bit.
Please break them down a bit. Like so the skin one. Let's go with the skin one.
Yeah, so the galvanic skin response is essentially measuring your skin conductivity. So your sweat, which is a nice way of saying how much you perspire. Okay. So the value in your skin conductivity is actually extremely powerful, because when we experience an emotion, we perspire. It's at a micro level, so it's not the most glamorous thing you might hear in the world, but we perspire. So if you were to take, for example, from a UX perspective, if someone is executing the test script, we would have them we'd be observing their eye tracking and where they're attending to on the screen. But then what would happen is you'd notice in their data a particular spike in emotional response. So, and then they perspire. So that might be linked to, a specific kind of what you might call a tripwire or a bug, or, just something in the exposure or in the journey that's just not really ticking the box, or it's causing stress. So the flip side of that is if you experience something extremely pleasing or, easy on the eye, or something, maybe you watch a TV ad and you watch it through to completion and you wait for that big crescendo at the end. I know all the Christmas ads are coming out now, so it's actually quite topical, but you'll have the...
I have to, when you go into topical, I have to address the latest John Lewis ad. It's like as if John Lewis always come out with an ad that causes controversy in some way, shape, or form. We're talking about the boy that's dressed up as a girl, and I know even joke emails now or joke mocks of these videos like, they added the jerks condoms at the end of the John Lewis ad as a joke. Geez. Well, there we go. There was a bit of a mock, because the boy is absolutely tearing apart the place with all the girl clothes on. But then John Lewis comes out and says, we didn't want to actually give that message in the advert, and everyone took it wrong. But surely they did know that they're going to trigger this type of response as well. Or are they... Is it secretly that they're aiming to get that response so everyone talks about the John Lewis ad at Christmas time?
Well, I can't speak for John Lewis or the creative agency, but they've always had a tremendous power to spark discussion, and I think now part of me would think maybe they regret releasing the original blockbuster ad, because now they're under so much pressure every year to perform, and everybody's waiting for the John Lewis creative to land. In terms of, I'd say sparking discussion is definitely high on the radar. Sparking these kind of discussions, I'm not so sure about it. I suppose I'd err on the safe side and say they probably wouldn't be trying to land that sort of a kind of a
between that
fanfare.
Between that and Paddy Power always aims for controversy, and it works. I think I think the biggest one of controversy in Ireland was like sticking an English flag on a building in Pearse Street in the city centre of Dublin. They know exactly what they're up to. Let's be honest.
And even when you think of the two lads they had on the mural, Declan Rice and Jack Grealish. So, that was designed to strike a chord. And I suppose the big thing is, and I suppose it ties into what John Lewis are doing and what Paddy Power are doing, and what we're actually trying to measure is that's triggering an emotional response. And you remember that because that triggered an emotional response. So the power of emotion is in the use of advertising or whatever it may be, your whole brand experience. If you can, it allows you to, and I heard a great way of phrasing it from I think it was Orlando Wood. He's kind of a guru in the advertising world, but he said emotion is very powerful in the sense that it orients attention in the sense that if there's something particularly emotional, it will grab your attention and you'll focus on it and you'll basically perk up. Think of it essentially like perking your ears up like your pet dog, maybe. Then what it'll do is it'll create associations within your mind. So what it does is it's like, think of it as like a cheat sheet to write memories into your brain, because if you think of think of Coca-Cola now and you think of red, you think of Christmas, the Christmas ad, you think of all these things that they've spent years driving home and all this messaging and these associations that they're driving home. But these are all built off emotional responses, and they can be small or they can be extremely powerful. Like, for example, when you watch the John Lewis ad and you have that emotional response, or one that we always kind of use as an example was last year's Super Value Christmas ad when the child was asking, is he coming? Is he coming? Is he coming?
And it meant granddad, not Santa. Yes, of course.
Exactly. You know what I mean? And it couldn't but hit you in the feels. But I remember that vividly because of the power of the emotional response it had. So you make these associations and you remember. And then the third kind of strength that like having an emotional response has is that it makes it very easy to recall the brand. So when you're at the point of purchase and you've thought of all the Coca-Cola ads come to mind and all these associations come flooding back because you've been triggered by the product or by the advertisement or whatever it is, it makes it very easy to call and make your purchasing decision. So ultimately what you're actually doing is making it actually impacting the consumer's behavior through all these inferences that you've made and all these behaviors and all these associations you've formed over time, which are through your relationships that you've built through advertising, customer experience, or even the design of your branding, everything across the whole kind of organization's ecosystem. Every touch point you have can essentially be measured under this kind of scope. So if then coming back, I suppose, to when we kicked off was around the different measurements. So we've kind of covered your galvanic skin response. So the interesting thing about that is we can measure how strongly you feel the emotion, as well as the presence of an emotion and how emotional the experience was. So sticking with TV ad, or even if we use this podcast as a stimulus, we could measure the average kind of emotional response over the course of the exposure. So what that means is, for the hour or per minute, we could say you experience 5.5 moments of arousal or emotional response throughout the course of that. But the interesting thing is that is actually only the presence of an emotion. It doesn't say whether it's positive or negative. So if you listen to something that's particularly frustrating, some people might hear, there might be a jingle on the radio and you're like, I can't believe I'm hearing that again. But doesn't mean it's completely negative, because that is still encoding memory. It's still driving home an emotional response. It's still triggering something. So there's not, the old kind of phrase, there's no such thing as bad publicity. It kind of applies in this sense. But what we then do when we have, I suppose, we know the presence of an emotional moment, what we have is then our facial expression analysis. And what that is works through the webcam or through any camera, where you'll have essentially your landmarks on your face will be kind of picked out, and we'll be measuring your micro expressions on your face and how they aggregate up into displayed emotions. So we have essentially nine displayed emotions, 2 positive and the vast majority are actually, funnily enough, negative. But we basically want to measure them micro movements and then tally that. And the interesting thing, how it all comes together now, it all sounds very scientific, but just using those 3 kind of I suppose modules, is that we can say what you're looking at, we can say whether it's triggered a response, and then we can label that response. So for example, we think that final crescendo moment of the super value ad, you're going to be looking at the child and the grandfather embracing. You're going to experience an onset of an emotional response, and then it's probably going to be an awe or a joy moment or some blend of the two. and we can then quantify the amplitude of all those things.
Wow. Okay.
So it's quite specific, and it's quite downstream in terms of what we're doing, in terms of the insight level.
When you do an insight and when you do surveys like this, how many people would you be trying to get as a quota to before you go, right, this ad is having impact?
So it in terms of what we do, it's very, I suppose, very precise. So we don't need to go at the same scale as what you think in terms of rolling out omnibus surveys where you need to recruit 1,000 people or 1,500 to have a nat rep sample. We can actually kind of operate on a 30 to 35 respondent basis. So if you wanted to kind of evaluate a creative, you kind of work on that basis. 50 is quite a strong kind of strong ground to get, but if you wanted an entirely nat rep sample, you could end up in around the region of 150 people. So interestingly, what you notice is that a lot of people have a lot of similar responses to the exposures, and there's a kind of a drop off, a diminishing returns effect, essentially to the analysis.
I guess you're working on all types of ads because you think of some of the road safety ads with the road safety authority, and you see like the horrors of crashes and I remember there used to be an ad that my late dad couldn't watch where the car flips and crashes into the kid over the wall and never ever
I remember that,
drive. Like, but it had that impact. Would you be doing all types? Would you be going down the from one end of horror right up to the joyous occasion of adverts that you're dealing with?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's always easy to remember the kind of we call them the awe moment or whatever it is, but shock, and I suppose that horror moment is equally as effective. You think of all the different kind of ads that have had that shocking effect, where the road safety ones are the ones that kind of jump to mind. Sometimes the anti-smoking adverts kind of stick out from maybe a different angle, not so much shock, but more maybe disgust. But what's interesting is that they all have they're all still designed to drive an emotional response, and essentially the framework for analyzing the ads doesn't change from our perspective. They just have a different output and a different kind of result, but they're essentially analyzed in a very similar process. And sometimes you might actually use them to baseline off each other to understand if maybe a brand might come to us and ask the question, we're still in the ideation stage and we're trying to decide where to go or how to design it, and we might say, well, look, what we could do is a rough cut kind of boilerplate test where we can see
sort of
what
you're
works.
just sort of answering my next question. Like, how do you design this out? Do you mock up an ad, do a bit of a survey, get people into the room, see what their responses are, and then maybe go back to the drawing board again with another production?
So what can actually happen is we can fit this into, I suppose, any phase of the creative journey. So what's important from the outset in what we do is to iron out, like, what is your research question? So what do you actually want to know? So sometimes it could be the creative is already done, the video work is produced, you've packaged up, and they just want to know, how is this performing? Is this ticking the box? Does it have the desired response? Or we could come in very early in the storyboard and we could do some readouts when they could, we could have a kind of a small storyboard, and I would read the concept to you while you're under observation, and we'd see how that responds with you. Then maybe some read of some graphical representations or mock-ups, then to like version 1, version 2, etc. The flexibility in what we do is really the beauty of it, in the sense that the platform allows for any sort of input to be put under observation. So what it means is we can actually flex the design of the study to make sure that we cater towards the needs of the client.
Now, I guess audio comes in and plays a massive part in this, because my example is that I stick on cartoons on, like, I joked about this in our last episode of the podcast with my co-host Simon, that us two guys have nice big 55 and 65 inch TV screens, and what do we put on it? YouTube Kids and Netflix for kids all day long, to just keep the kids entertained at home after school. But my 2-year-old daughter, as soon as she sees the Netflix logo come up on screen, she goes dudung, like she knows the actual dudung that of the Netflix logo, and she's 2 years
Yeah.
of age. Like it's just like the old idea of like when we used to play computer games. Where okay, I'll show my age, but when we seen the old Sega Master System logo coming up, Sega, being sung out on our screen, it's amazing how just a small little second long clip can have such impact, even just with a logo.
Yeah.
So I guess you're playing around with those ideas as well.
Yeah, so I suppose the thing about our senses is we've probably 70+% of everything that our brain processes is probably coming through our eyes. So it's in and around that kind of a base.
Oh, to our
But
eyes. Okay, yeah.
yeah, so visually, but audio has a unique way of bypassing everything and just getting straight to the point. So interestingly, some things in terms of like is more on the human behavior kind of side of things is think about if you're in a room and you're at a party or whatever it may be and you're talking to someone but you suddenly hear your name. What happens to your attention? Where does it go? And immediately you're listening to the conversation offside and you can't focus on what's happening in front of you. So audio has a profound ability to essentially cut through the noise, for want of a better way of labeling it, and can grab our attention in a extremely powerful way. So in terms of how that would actually map into what we do then is, for example, you might look at 2 different backing tracks. So you might have an A version and a B version, and we could do like an A/B test and understand the performance of the ads or whatever it may be. It might even be an audio ad for the radio. We can understand and understand how people are responding to that, and then what we can do is then make a judgment or a recommendation based off of the data that we have, that this is the top performing creative with this audio. Other things that you can do is there might be elements of the audio within a creative that you might want to place in a certain part or in a segment, and you have a 30-second video and you're not sure whether to put this small little line into the thing. It might be a little risky, might be a little outside the box. So you test it, and then we can come out and take it from there. And that's some way that we can kind of isolate it. But the challenge sometimes with audio is that you need to make sure you're controlling the environment and you keep the test as kind of transparent as possible and as comparable as possible. So if you're doing an A/B test, you need to make sure that you're not introducing additional variables that don't ensure that it is an audio versus audio test.
Interesting. It's such it's a rabbit hole of different things that you could look at. So it's sort of, with that in mind, how long would it take for a starting of a project right to completion of an advert on average?
So on average, what you would do is, I suppose, for a boilerplate one where we're just testing the creative, and we hand over a report, what we would do is we'd commission the research, gather the requirements, sign off the kind of the design inside a week. That'd be and that'd be kind of a casual enough approach. We can ramp it up, no problem, but you'd be looking at ironing out the requirements and building the study inside a week. Then you'd be collecting the data over the course of another week, and you'd probably have your report by the end of the 3rd week. So we want to make sure that our turnaround time, it's something we pride ourselves on, is to our turnaround time should be quicker than any focus group, and should be quicker than any. We want to take that kind of burden out of research where people recruit an agency and they have to go and they have to survey 1,000 people and all this sort of stuff, and they're waiting on responses. Now I have to say that the survey and the omnibus approach has been streamlined an awful lot with digital panels and stuff like that, but what we want to do is, and we pride ourselves on kind of turnaround time and making sure you have actionable insights within kind of a 3 to 3.5 week kind of duration.
Now it links in with some of the stuff you do. Maybe you don't do as much on a physical environment as when consumers walk into an actual shop. There's new technology coming out all the time. I don't know, have you ever attended Information Systems Europe or ISE over in Amsterdam, and
I haven't.
some of the audiovisual tech conferences. Like, it's for the past 3 or 4 years, it was in Amsterdam. Now it's moved over to Barcelona. But I've walked into trade show affairs, and every one of the big AV companies is trying to buy your attention. But they're more and more in conference. They have the technology and the sound to break up the sound bars, in that if you were standing to the furthest left, someone could be listening to one language. If you stood in the middle, someone could be speaking a different language. And they're measuring this, and they're using this as tracking tools for not just like lobbies of hotels or or interactive museums, but they're also talking about some of the stalls at ISE will talk about like the trade experience, or standing in front of an interactive mirror and try on the dress. Have you ever thought with future proof of going down that road, or?
Yeah, so there's a few kind of things in there. I'll start with, I suppose, the real world testing. So that is viable. It's possible. We can, I suppose, place people under observation within the real world. The way that changes is that where we were kind of discussing watching a TV ad or whatever it may be, you'll actually be wearing, I suppose, eye tracking goggles, and you'll be kind of navigating around the environment with your biosensors on in the real world.
Okay.
So it just changes the actual environment. And then now they're labor intensive, let's say, on the data and on the far end and the analysis, because the way you navigate your way through ISE or the way I navigate it are completely different, and the way you attend to things visually with your attention is completely different as well. So it's about trying to make these things as uniform as possible. And so in terms of where the technology and where the industry and where we are, all this stuff is possible to do now. But it then kind of tapping into what you were talking about, things like the augmented reality, the mirrors, and the development of different kind of, I suppose, the enhancements in technology in general across any industry actually creates an opportunity for us, because with every new advancement and every new kind of development, take Meta for example, it's very topical now at the moment. The metaverse is actually, that's an opportunity for us, because we can understand how people are actually feeling whilst engaging in virtual reality kind of, and what you might call the simulation. So we can actually, these things and all these developments that are outside of our internal development kind of procedures are actually creating further opportunities and really interesting opportunities for us to understand, okay, while it sounds cool, what is the response of people towards these things, and how are they actually navigating it, and how are they responding to them?
Now, of course, everything you're doing is of an ethical basis. You're recruiting people in. I can't have you on the show without talking about the types of Cambridge Analytica, without talking about now. And I'll take you out of the box of future-proof insights and go the Sean Higgins thought. Like, I have coffees with friends and family and stuff. It's like, I hate these Amazon Alexas. I hate these Google Chromes. Like, they're listening to you all the time. And I have friends that are absolutely 110% convinced, Sean, that Google's listening to them all the time, because they mentioned that, like, oh, I want to have a cigarette, and then all of a sudden, like, or they're talking about cars, and then all of a sudden they're seeing all the things on their cookies.
Oh yeah. So
what's your thoughts? or do you want to comment?
No problem at all. I suppose in terms of, is your phone listening to you or not? It's an interesting one. I suppose there's a few elements to it. People sometimes don't realize how predictable they are, and they don't realize how much they fit profiles. Now, in saying that, there are always coincidences that feel a little funny and a little uncomfortable. I've experienced it myself. But like when you tie it back to this kind of the ethical approach to Cambridge Analytica and the way they approached it, like from the perspective of what they did and the way they used the data that they had and the methods that they had, like what we do, anything that has the power to persuade needs to be managed and used in an ethical manner. So what the data that we are taking and the insights that we're generating are essentially tools for persuasion. But there's no point labeling it any other way. So what we need to do is make sure that what we do is always, and sometimes the word ethical, makes it feel quite corporate and stuffy, and feel like a big conglomerate's talking. But on a human level and as a person, you need to make sure that it's right, and we need to make sure that what we do is actually making better experiences for the customer or the consumer. And that's kind of how you might call it a North Star for something, that sounds a bit more visionary. But what we need to do is just make sure that, everything is on track and it's being done for the right reasons. Because, if we do deviate into going down something a little more sinister, like Cambridge Analytica kind of fell into the trap of doing, it speaks for itself. Look where Cambridge Analytica are now. Look at the problems it created. If Cambridge Analytica hadn't have done that, they'd be one of probably the world's leading research agencies and data scientists. So the ends justifies the means, really, and it's a zero sum game, and we're here for the long term. We believe in what we do. You're selling yourself short going for the quick buck, and that's
Absolutely.
something that we need to make sure we're cognizant of, because it as I said, anything, and I suppose to tie it all off, anything that has the power to persuade people and to give inferences on how to persuade people needs to be done cautiously and ethically.
And it sort of brings me to the thought of Christmas is coming up, children's toys. Would you delve into the fact of like surveying kids, or are you allowed to survey kids in a more legal, ethical question? Like if a company came to you and said, we have the latest toy and we want to see kids' reactions, let's throw out the word PlayStation for an example, the new PlayStation 5. Are you allowed to survey kids?
So in terms of, we are allowed, there's the legal procedures and consents and all that sort of stuff once it's above board. But from our perspective, it would be very important to iron out what is the research question. So, if you're I suppose, if you're trying to optimize your platform or your PlayStation for, user engagement and you want to hold attention and all these sort of things that, when you map them out and extrapolate it over the course of a few years, then it could be quite, it could be a hindrance to a lot of children. So you need to make sure what you're researching and the value you're providing and what you're doing is above board, and you're not designing a monster or helping to design a monster that can you think of, the thing that's jumping to mind here is, the documentary on Netflix is The Social Network, where you have, that's the thing that I'm thinking of, is how these platforms are optimized and these algorithms are designed to grab hold and fixate on your attention. And look, we all know and hear of the kind of the court cases that are going on at the moment, and the people that are up in front of hearings discussing how certain algorithms are designed to I suppose accentuate hate and all these sorts of different things. And that's kind of what's jumping off in my mind when I was saying that we need to make sure what we're researching is for the betterment of the consumer's experience, not just for the benefit of a client as well.
John, it's been absolutely fascinating. I could have you on all night talking about tech and like even just the whole marketing end of things. I remember when I did my degree way back when in Ballyfermot College, it was like this subconscious of learning about audio and how audio can manipulate, and it didn't go as far as sell me this pen type of approach, but it's amazing how we've gone from a world of just audio and visual into just looking into the basic fundamentals, but now looking at the tracking of movement between whether it be online or whether it be in the whole aspect of nearly the five senses, as you just described. If people want to find out more about Futureproof and yourself, what's the best way of contacting you?
So the best place to go for any information would be our website, futureproofinsights.ie. But if anyone's interested in neuromarketing or consumer neuroscience, just get in touch with me on LinkedIn. It's the best place to get me, and I'm always happy to have a conversation, and always keen to hear some alternative views on what we're doing.
John, it's been a pleasure having you on board, and I'll thank you so much for joining us on episode 53.